Right, it's picking it up now, but it's not getting enough data. It should click in shortly. Okay, if you come out of that,
refresh.
Right, we're finally live. So I'm just going to mute the mic and run the time forward to eventually get there. See if anybody joins us. Well, hello everyone. We finally made it. Once again, technical problems. I am surrounded by technology here, and I've been struggling to get the connection. I did all the marketing and all the promotion, and once again, technology has just taken it all away from me in a foul swoop. But thankfully we're here already, or we're here now. It looks like the stream quality won't be too bad, but there will be a recording of this afterwards. So for people watching this after the event, hopefully the quality will be there. Just reminding me to press the record button. The quality will be there for those people coming afterwards. But welcome once again to the live stream. Now I'm joined with my partner in crime, Andy Howell, who is beaming in from the distant fair shores of Birmingham. Good evening, Andy.
Good evening, Bob. Are we in business then?
We appear to be in business, yes. I do hope we'll be online for a good while.
Great. Well, it's good to be here. And I mean, the only other thing I'd be doing tonight would be probably wild camping. So there you go.
Well, I can see you've got a nice rucksack hanging on the back door there, which is very subtle. I think it's which one is that? That's is that a
it's a Mountain Laurel rucksack.
Mountain Laurel, is it? Ah, okay.
Yeah, always ready to go.
Ready to go. Excellent. That's what I like to see. So what are we going to do? We're going to get through various subjects related to wild camping and to try and help people get through any questions or any thoughts they might have. Unfortunately, the social media buttons, which are supposed to be working to bring in the conversations, aren't bringing in the conversations. Although this is all taking place on YouTube, so if I don't edit it this time, then the conversations will actually stay on the screen, which may help people. So I've got Rose sitting over in the corner here, also offering any advice or any answers to people's questions that either we miss or whatever, because I can't see the screen, which is even more frustrating. So how do you want to start this, Andy?
I don't know. I'm in your hands, Bob. I mean, I guess one of the most important things is to just recognise that, you know, there were always new people coming in and you're getting interested in the outdoors. And I get every summer a little flurry of people emailing me through my blog about wild camping. So, you know, all the time there were new people coming into this. And I think probably when I think about when I did it for the first time, you know, there were lots of things you're not sure about or that you're worried about. It's probably always useful to go over the basics, but also to just try and transmit to people the absolute wonder of wild camping in a really phenomenal location.
Indeed, and I think I'll run a slideshow in a second, and we can talk over that regarding some of the places that you and I have both experienced in various ways wild camping and the pleasures that can be gained from it. Just want to welcome Phil Winter. Philip Winter's joined us, and Oscar, and the Shropshire Lad, I can see, has also put a comment on the YouTube chat there. So welcome, guys. Nice to see you along. I'm sure there's only a handful of people watching us tonight, which will probably be good because we're bound to make loads of mistakes. And on that note, well, let's have a little slideshow of some of the wild camping adventures that we have had, and Andy, because we both produced these pictures, Andy and I have had, and perhaps Andy, you'd like to talk over some of the experiences here.
Well, the picture in front of you there is, there's Bob just popping out of his tent. I mean, most of the pictures you're looking at are from Scotland, the Scottish Highlands. And one of the wonderful joys of Scotland is that wild camping is permitted under the right to roam legislation within certain common sense boundaries. And the other pictures you're seeing from me are taken in the High Pyrenees Mountains. And that, again, is a mountain range where wild camping is encouraged. Now, one of the reasons it's encouraged is because it's a very big mountain range and it's pretty easy to hide yourself. But I think the pictures do give you a feel for the special nature of some of these sites. And, you know, just spending the evening quietening down after a long day's walk, eating some food, just sitting there, taking in the scenery, and then waking up the next morning to some of these stunning views, the kind of views that you're seeing on the screen, is just one of life's great experiences, and probably one of the most relaxing chill out things that you'll do, I guess.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, agree with what you were saying, and perhaps we should start this by talking about the practicalities, the legalities, because that's the first thing that usually crosses most people's minds as regarding where they can go. And as you've already mentioned, Scotland has a wonderful right to roam, or what do they call it, the Scottish Access Guide. Not that one, but that one. And it's I'll put all these links on the show notes afterwards, because there's quite a few useful ones here. But this is the Visit Scotland website, and it gives you detailed information on the Scottish Access Code, which is basically don't stay anywhere for more than 2 or 3 days, keep away from roads, certainly no fires, use a stove where possible, never open an open fire, etc. Take all your rubbish away, leave no trace, which is the most important thing. I've got another website dealing with that we'll talk about. And keeping away from the built-up areas, and obviously sort of private land, gardens and that sort of thing. I think the code is here in full detail, responsible behaviours by the public, etc. But unfortunately, it got a little bit spoilt in just find the right website, in the Loch Lomond area. Now, Loch Lomond is a beautiful part of the world, but also it's very, very easy access. And as a result of a lot of damage that took place in recent years, 2 or 3 years back, gosh, probably more than that now, 5 or 6 years back, they've had to limit the access to where you can camp, and there's now a permit system. I think it's about £3 a night, and they want you to camp at certain places around Loch Lomond. But it's all because it is fairly easy access from the road, and naturally people unfortunately have abused the system and taken or not taken their rubbish away with them. And when Rose did the West Highland Way, she was saying that she was walking past even then certain areas where people had just thrown in old motorbikes, push bikes, tents and just general rubbish. But it's made a big difference apparently. But the rest of Scotland does abide by this wild camping access code. And as I was saying with the photographs that I was showing there, there is some wonderful space that you can get to, and obviously enjoy the surroundings quite nicely. So that's one area, and then the other area we'll talk about is Dartmoor. But I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, Andy.
Well, I think the Loch Lomond story has been a bit controversial. I must admit I've got some sympathy with them, because not only the ease of access, I mean, we have the West Highland Way going through there, which is extraordinarily busy. And I think it does highlight that if you're looking to go out and spend your first night wild camping, or maybe a couple of days, check on the map before you go and make sure you know the area you're looking at. You kind of got somewhere you've aimed for. Maybe even got forums that exist. Ask people where there are good wild camp locations, because the thing is, people doing it for the first time tend to get a bit nervy, and maybe there's a tendency to stay somewhere a little bit closer to the road, or a little bit safer. And that's where the problem lies, because everybody's staying in the same place. So spend a little bit of time planning about it. Now, if you're in a big area like the Scottish Highlands, and you're, for example, walking down one of the long glens that's maybe doesn't have road access, then if you aim for somewhere and you don't get there, or you decide to walk on a bit, because the country is so big, you will always find somewhere to pitch a tent. If you're in a much smaller area of National Trust land or whatever, then you might not. So just make sure you have lots in hand. Don't aim to walk until it's too late. Aim to start walking at a reasonably sensible time, so that you can enjoy the environment. But it gives you a little bit of flexibility there to maybe go off and look for somewhere else if you think you've maybe in too busy a spot. But certainly, both here and in France and elsewhere on the continent, I've seen some pretty spoiled sites that are just the obvious ones, too close to the road. So, like everything else, really, a bit of preparation and just a bit of consideration for everybody goes a long way. That photograph there shows you some scorch marks and big bonfire marks there. Now, hopefully, if you're wild camping there's a barbecue. If you're hopefully wild camping with just a backpacking stove, you're not going to leave a mark like that. But the real problem there is not so much one mark; it's that everybody's camping in the same place.
Absolutely, and these images were taken in various places around Scotland, and is exactly as you say. It's unfortunately a camping spot. In fact, the next picture, I think there's a couple of pictures coming up where people have not even taken their rubbish away with them, but stashed it under a bridge, and you can see that the actual access passage under the bridge is completely full of rubbish, which seems ridiculous. They actually took it there, but they didn't take it away, which is a great shame. Now, of course, the other place, we were talking purely about legalities before we talk about practicalities. So we had the Scottish access, and say all the links to the various websites that I show you on here will be in the show notes. So by all means, have a look at those and try and clarify it for yourself. But the other area is, of course, Dartmoor. And let me just see if I can pull that one up. Where are we? Scotland. Here we go. So the Dartmoor National Park has, again, a fairly loose approach to the camping. They're fairly affable about it, but they do like you, if possible, to keep it limited to certain areas. So this is their website, and it also talks about the larger things like motorhomes, camper vehicles and large family tents. We're specifically talking in this video really about one-man, two-man tents and no more than 2 or 3 tents together, because it starts to turn into a party and then things get worse, unfortunately. But there's an interactive camping map guide on their website which is quite useful, which shows the areas, if I can just call that up, which are safe for camping. I think that's, yeah, as clear as it's going to be on the screen. So those are the sort of permitted areas if you're familiar with Dartmoor. And there's plenty of space there, but once again you'll notice how close certain areas are to the road, and of course the whole point about wild camping is to actually get away from the road and the people around you, if at all possible. So their scheme is just an advisory one. I don't think they're charging for any reason, and there are bylaws, etc. And it says here, remember, camp 100 metres from the road and leave no trace. And for more information, talking of which, I'll come on to the leave no trace in a minute, but I'm going to hand back to you, Andy, while I change the pictures over to more of the camping scenes.
I think national parks are interesting things to consider. I regularly camp on the Long Mynd in Shropshire, but I know the area quite well, and I will go on to one of the quieter walks and I will camp off. I'll find a little tributary running down to stream and wander up there and camp on it. I'm not going to be camping near the major touristy walks for obvious reasons. Now, in that situation, I don't know whether it's encouraged or not, but early in the morning when I've started walking up high, I've met a warden who clearly knows what I've been doing, but they can kind of tell that you know what you're about, and they're very happy and they smile and they're cheerful and all the rest of it. But for example, if you were, I've walked both the North Downs Way and the South Downs Way, and I'm pretty sure you could find somewhere to wild camp there, but I wouldn't even start to think about it. The walks are too busy, they're too condensed, and certainly if there are opportunities to camp there, then you really need to research them in advance. So some of the quieter national parks, as long as you're very sensible and you're secluded, you'll be fine. But the really, really big ones, where you maybe got 2 or 3 very, very popular trails, I think you need to be a bit wary of that. And the same one's true in Europe, really. I prefer the Pyrenees. I prefer walking to the Pyrenees and the Alps because wild camping is a bit easier. Now, that's not to say that you can't wild camp in the Alps, but if you're stuck on one of the major footpaths, and major thoroughfares, then obviously it's more difficult. If you're in Scotland and you're walking across a route or a few day route across the mountains, then you'll have no trouble finding somewhere that's secluded. But if you're walking on the West Highland Way, then you're going to have to work at it to not be seen. So, as always, it's very sensible. But the main thing to realise is that people who are not taking the time to be considerate and looking after the site and leaving no trace, these are the people who are, making it more difficult for the rest of us in times to come. And we've seen a similar situation with Scottish bothies over the years. I've had some wonderful nights in and around Scottish bothies. I've had some terrible nights, always in bothies that are too close to the road. A group of guys come up from, it's always these guys, come up from the road with their cans of beer and whatever and have a great party and don't really leave the place in the condition they should, or respect the environment in the way that they should. So it's a very similar situation. So always, I think, use some sense and be clear about why you're doing it as well. I mean, you're wanting to wild camp, I think, so that you can make the most of that environment around you. So for me, in the summer, that means stopping early enough to enjoy it and being able to have some food, taking the scenery or whatever, banging away, not making camp until 9 or 10 o'clock at night is hard, and you're probably not going to be in tune with the surroundings as much as you would if you were making the camp itself an integral or an important part of your trip.
Yeah, and that's true. That's the whole point, really. And some of these images here I'm showing now are sort of views that I've experienced predominantly up in Scotland, but certainly along the Two Moors way as well down in Devon. And I know some of them that you sent me from your trips in Scotland. Some of them are from Isle of Skye and some are from Pyrenees. It just goes to show you that it is possible, and it is possible to get that balance. I mean, the whole point about doing it is enjoying the camping, not making it, as you often say, a route march. The other thing that's worthwhile mentioning is there are websites that are set up to give you a hand regarding Leave No Trace, and there's a pretty good one actually, lnt.org, which goes on to the main principles of what is the 7 main principles of Leave No Trace in the backcountry. And there's quite a weight behind this particular group that's gaining momentum. I certainly remember speaking to the guys in Ireland when Tough Souls, when they were saying that they're, I think, ambassadors, and I think this is a group they're ambassadors for now, and they're teaching people the whole Leave No Trace principle, which is getting more and more important, of course, with the environmental issues and the eco issues that we're having presented to us by general media on a regular basis these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything else. You need to plan, not just location. You want to be enjoying yourself. So, the kind of lightweight backpacking principles really come into their own when you're doing this as well, because you don't want to be hauling tons and tons of gear into the middle of nowhere. And the more gear that you carry, I guess, the more likely you are to use it. So Leave No Trace is pretty important, and I think if that philosophy is not only instilled in wild campers, but it's understood, and it's understood by people who are not just the owners of the land, the stewards of the land. That's important. You mentioned Ireland there. I've walked a lot in Ireland, and it's not always easy because there's not a tradition of walking in Ireland in the way that there is here. I mean, I always joke that one of the best leisure pastimes of Irish farmers seems to be putting up barbed wire fences. But that being said, particularly since the crash, Ireland has been putting a lot more emphasis onto a more diverse tourism map. You begin to see a lot more long distance footpaths, particularly in coastal areas. So I guess, the more that we instill and we talk about and we promote the Leave No Trace philosophy, the more likely I think it is that wild camping is going to become more acceptable to a wider range of landowners or organisations that are stewarding the well-being of the land.
Another interesting website, again, which will be in the show notes, is a British legal one regarding what is the right to roam over agricultural and other land. And it makes for quite a good read, and it's related to the freedom to roam, right to roam. I think we're probably talking about two specific areas really when we're talking about wild camping. Generally, as you can see from the videos, Andy and I obviously enjoy getting out and cooking in wild places, enjoy the whole camping experience. It isn't necessarily about making the trip as tough as it possibly can be, although that does happen from time to time, but it is nice to sit back.
I should say, Bob, it's not obligatory to bring food as attractive and well presented and stored as you do there.
Well, that one particular one of those two plates of food was obviously from our Christmas experience in 2011, where I cooked a 3-course Christmas meal just to see if I could do it in a tent in a storm, which was an absolute hoot.
Yes, indeed you did.
And there's a podcast about that on the Outdoors station, so you must have a look at that at some stage if you want to have a good laugh relating to that. Now, let's not get away from the subject too much. Let us talk about the other areas, really sort of general hiking. I'm sure a lot of people would like your thoughts, Andy, and perhaps mine, whatever, on where to go if they're doing it for the first time. As you said, I totally agree with you. Keep it simple is probably the main thing. Don't try and export the entire kitchen and the house and all the camping gear to somewhere where you're going to feel uncomfortable camping. And really keep it simple and keep the impact as minimal as possible in mind. Is probably the most important thing to say, I would guess. The outlying suggestion that Alistair Humphreys came up with, actually, which is quite a good one, really. He of the recent mini adventures, and also again I interviewed him a few weeks back, was suggesting is actually keep it very minimal the first time, so you get a feel for the actual experience, but also how much pleasure you can get from it. So, for example, after you've had your food in the evening, pop up to a local hill with a sleeping bag, especially when the summer is the way it is at the moment, and kip down for the night, and then 6 o'clock in the morning, leave and head back home and just see how you felt about sleeping out in the open air. Certainly, I've really enjoyed the freshness that it gives you, and I've long since changed really from a tent to just sleeping in a bivvy bag under a tarp if the weather's bad, because I just enjoy lying there and opening my eyes up. If I hear some wild thing moving through the undergrowth, it's just interesting just to turn your head and open your eyes and try and focus to actually see what it is, as opposed to being inside a tent and imagining a huge great monster outside.
Yeah, I can. Last summer, I think it was, I just went out for an evening while camping on the side of the Long Mynd in a quiet place that I'd not used before. And in the middle of the night, there's a bit of noise, and a whole wild, Long Mynd ponies came down and fed at the stream next to me. It was one of those wonderful experiences I've also had in the Scottish Highlands. I've been sitting there at night suddenly and suddenly heard a strange noise next to my tent that looked like somebody who'd been smoking heavy cigarettes, Gauloises cigarettes, all their lives, really husky noise. And it was a stag. He'd come down to the water's edge to call around this cirque, which presumably he did every evening. And so, you do get lots of these great experiences. Just looking at the comments that are coming up on the site, and you ask about where might be a good place to start. I think a lot of it depends on where you live and how close you are. So I can see people here talking about Scotland, obviously, the lakes and so on. Now that's going to be a different story wherever you are. And I think what I would say is that aim to wild camp in a place that you know reasonably well for walking. So you know where the quieter areas are and the more secluded areas are. I mean, if you're, let's say you're living in Surrey, and you just decide to have a go at it and head out on the North Downs Way without really knowing where you are, I think that would kind of be asking for trouble. Now, I wouldn't think about camping there, but the kind of that come out, the Waymere's guys that come out, will have their favourite spots there. But it's about knowing the area. So, for example, just one place that I go walking to quite a lot, being based in Birmingham, and as would other people on Merseyside or Great Manchester, Snowdonia. Now, I'm pretty sure you can find wild spots on the side of Snowdon, but I've never really looked. But if you go onto the other side of the A5, the Carnado, and some of the quieter areas there, again, away from the major walking routes at the top of Carnad Daffyd and Carnad Llewellyn, you will find places where it's quite easy to disappear in the hills and camp. So I think know your hills before you set out to do that, and aim for an area that you know is pretty secluded.
Yes, thinking about it, also it may be worth making contact with some local people who, like you, share an interest and would like the comfort of somebody to hold their hand, as it were, joining them for a simple trip. As Andy says, go somewhere perhaps you're familiar with, that you can escape from, if you like, if you feel uncomfortable for whatever reason that may be, whether the weather's against you, you've eaten far too much food, or whatever, that you feel you can escape from and it's not too uncomfortable. And there are various places and numerous places to find people, starting of which, of course, good old Facebook, and there's an actual wild camping group on Facebook, which is quite well attended. I think it's got some 50,000 people there as members, and there's all sorts of advice and tips. Of course, you ask a question, you're going to get lots and lots of answers, but it's certainly a good place to perhaps make some local contacts, see if there's somebody local in your area that may be interested in doing something similar. And there is the Backpackers Club as well, which is a very established hiking club. There's only a few hundred members in it, and they're all characters, there has to be said. But the Backpackers Club welcomes people, and they encourage support, and also share a lot of knowledge from a lot of, should we say, old timers that have been doing it for a very long time, and they also know quite a few interesting places to camp as well. There's a wealth of knowledge in the Backpackers Club, and it's only a few pounds to join, and again there are local members around the country that are worthwhile making contact with.
I'd certainly echo that, Bob. I think ask about, and don't feel shy in asking, does anybody wild camp in this area? Do they have any sites that they will share? I mean, I generally don't put the grid references of my wild camp sites in on blog posts or trip reports. But if somebody emails me privately, they'll share them with them. Another thing that I do is when I'm out walking in areas that I know well, and I go back to again and again, I'm always looking for wild camp spots. As I'm walking around and thinking, that'd be a good place to be, and I'll make a mental note, or these days maybe just stick a pin in a map on a mobile phone or something. So I'm always keeping an eye out for those places that might be really good wild camp spots. Though, like everything else, things can change. I found a wonderful spot in Snowdonia a few years ago. Got very excited at the notion of wild camping there, and a year later did have the hair. And the site, which was a lovely little flat platform near the side of a tiny waterfall in a glade, suddenly wasn't nice at all, and whether maybe sheep had stopped no grazing on the site, and it was lumpier and horrible. I don't know. Another on my first TGO challenge, I think on my first night of my first TGO challenge, I found a gorgeous spot, and I think one of the photographs that is floating around here is it was a wonderful evening. And I went back 5 years, absolutely dreadful. So maybe it wasn't being grazed anymore or whatever, but certainly wasn't attractive. But one of the things you should be doing is when you go out and about on well-known territories, always keeping your eye out for a good site. I always look to see where there's wood as well, because I like you, Bob, I like using a backpacking wood-burning stove.
Yeah, which
So
we must
keep your wits
mention
about you and be sensible.
which are very small and actually don't leave a scar mark like the barbecues that we saw there. They're specifically made for a particular job. I finally got some of the social comments working, and Wandering Jay here says, see many people do no fires, exactly the subject we were just talking about. Can that come through? Christian Feldman, hi from Germany. Nice to thank you for joining us. And let's have a look. There's another one here. And Stuart Price from Yorkshire. Regularly camp in the Peak District. Thoroughly recommended. Keep up the good work. He enjoyed the latest podcast about Iceland. Great. I've got a good one coming this week about aches and pains, actually. So stay tuned for that. Okay.
That's interesting seeing Stuart's comments. I guess he must be from South Yorkshire, because there is some fabulous walking and wild camping in the Yorkshire Dales, providing you're sensible and you plan ahead. Peak District, I don't think I've ever wild camped there, so it's not something I've thought about before, but maybe I'll ping Stuart a message and see where he goes.
Well, it's a long time since we've had a good wild camp together, Andy. Perhaps we should get together and have a day trip or a weekend trip somewhere like that and try an area that we've never actually been in before.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun in going out together. I remember a few years ago we went to the Pembrokeshire coastal path, and we're heading out onto the path, and I'm saying to you, I know this lovely little spot that's fantastic, that's just got a little spot just big enough for 2 tents, if you remember. When we finally got there and we turned around the corner, there was a tent slap bang in the middle of it. So we kind of metaphorically knocked on the door, and there's another TGO challenger who'd gone out there. But we soon found another place. Maybe not so good, but we did find somewhere.
Yeah, that was
with a little bit of.
It's quite
Bob Tucker, I think.
Quite an amusing conversation as well. Well, you pinched our spot. Well, I was here first. I seem to remember something along those lines. Anyway, so what else can we help people with, do you think?
Well, I can see Jim and Mags Newton here are saying, have you ever wild camped on the South Downs Way? I certainly haven't. I'm not saying that you can't. I mean, I think I'd want to do the planning about that. I mean, my memory of walking the South Downs Way is that it can be pretty busy. Christian Feldman is saying, which is the best area to start hiking in the UK? I mean, if we're talking about the UK and you're looking to come here for the first time, Christian, I would head for the Scottish Highlands without a doubt. It's stunning, it's big, it's wonderful, and wild camping is part of the world there.
Yeah.
But there are many other places, the Peak District, Snowdonia, other places. But if I was coming to the UK for the first time, looking to hike and wild camp, it would certainly be the Highlands of Scotland.
The other thing I think worth mentioning, and it does make Scotland quite different, we've both experienced it, is that when you are in wild land and the ranger visits, or the gamekeeper, whatever, and comes past and generally drives up to you, there's always that natural fear of, oh dear, I'm going to get told off, I've done something wrong here. But usually they say, have you got enough water? Is there any rubbish can I take away for you? Which is really good. Their actual attitude is much more welcoming and really takes the wind out of your sails, because there's been a few times when you first start walking in Scotland, certainly, Christian, that you might think you're in the wrong place. But as long as you're away from anybody else's homestead and the roads, you're pretty well good to go. But as everybody is also joining into the chat now, saying, you know, don't have fires.
I did mention earlier. Yeah, I did mention earlier that often the rangers and in Scotland, the gillies, who are the guys who look after the estates, they can tell it. I think their main concerns at different in the year is, you know, if the birds are laying their eggs or whatever, they get a bit nervous about hoping people stay on the paths and whatever. But you know, I think most of them can tell, people who are sensible. You're not carrying masses of stuff. You're not staggering around with bottles of beer everywhere. So, you know, I think people will give you a lot more. If you're courteous and you're obviously being careful, then they'll cut you a lot more slack than other people will.
So let's just quickly talk about potentially Wales then, because that's obviously another large land mass with a fair amount of space on it. Have you got any experiences you'd like to share about camping in Wales? I've got a couple.
Most of my wild camping in Wales has been in Snowdonia, because it's a big mountain range and it's a national park. I would avoid anywhere near the big paths, to be honest. In fact, I often don't walk on any of the big ones now, they're just too busy. But I mentioned the Carnarvon earlier on. I mean, one of my favourite walks is to take the train up to the north coast, get off at one of the little stations there and just walk into the mountains. There's a lovely walk that climbs above the Devil's Falls, is it, I think? From one of the little villages near Llanfairfechan. And there's some lovely wild camp spots up there. And then from there, the next day, you can walk on up to Carneg Llewellyn and the views there. Walk back down to the Ogwen Valley, and then it's, you know, if you wanted to make pace quickly, it's an hour or so walk into Capel Cerrig, where there are, you know, conventional campsites. And you might want to mix it. You might want to spend the night in a campsite, a B&B or a youth hostel, and maybe just do one night's wild camping.
That's a good way of doing it, actually, is actually walking between campsites and just having a one wild night just to try it out for the first time, or a couple of wild nights.
And you know, it makes sense. Just thinking about Christian's comments about Scotland again. You know, there are the bothies as well. Now, bothies are very popular with some people. Personally, I really like staying in them or camp nearby. But you could have a few days stopping in bothies and camping nearby. Somebody made a comment on one of the things here about navigation skills in Scotland. You know, yes, but if you plan and ask around, there are brilliant walks that are not that challenging. So, for example, somewhere like Glentilt that runs from Blair Athol, you know, that would make a lovely walk up there, even if you just walked up to the edge of the Cairngorms and back again. So there are, if not long distance footpaths, there are well established walking routes. But then, of course, in Scotland, like every mountain range, the weather can change. So, you know, some navigational skills are useful. But even in the Highlands of Scotland, there are walks that you can do that are not too scary.
Nice question here from, or comment rather, from Shropshire Lad. He said he once emailed a ranger from the National Trust area to ask him if he had permission to camp, and he was fairly affable about it. And obviously, as he said, sometimes it's worth asking nicely. There's another question here. Where are we? I was going to send that through. Have you done the TGO with wood burning stoves? I saw a few last time, did it in 2010, but I wonder how much extra effort. Well, actually, Colin Ibbotson was the first person I saw using one of the little bush buddies wood burning stoves, a good 10, almost probably 12 years ago now, when I first met him doing the TGO. and I was fascinated. And we had a long discussion about that as we were walking. I think we were walking with you at some stage, Andy. And I remember him saying that what he'd had to do. He does live in Scotland, so he's sort of fairly knowledgeable of the sort of areas where they can find wood. But when we'd set up camp, it was by a stream bed or a riverside. It was riverside the few times I camped with him. He disappeared for half an hour and have to walk up and down the river looking for dried pieces of wood, which had obviously drifted onto the side of the river, which he could use. So it is possible. And I've used one, particularly if you take a little alcohol stove as well, so that where you struggle to find either dry wood or any wood, and we're only talking a handful of twigs the size of a pencil,
I think
you can use an alcohol stove.
I think that's the point. I wouldn't set out to do the TGO challenge just using wood. Never in a million years. I would carry with me a small stove that would allow me to burn some alcohol, or use a Nesbitt stove, something like the honey stove or the Caldera cones or something like that. Take that so that, if the weather is nice and you find a nice site, you can find some sticks, but I wouldn't rely on it, not in Scotland. If you're on the continent where it's very warm, almost Mediterranean conditions, it can be a fantastic way to entertain yourself, if nothing else, during the long nights. But in Scotland on a TGO challenge, in May, you might be lucky, but I would be having a multi-fuel stove, which predominantly I was using alcohol with, and I'd have the option of wood burning on those few occasions when you've got a supply of dry wood and the weather's fine. I wouldn't count on it.
Okay, well, I'm going to run a little bit of video just to give people a bit more of a taster. And well, as you can see there, the two characters that were looking for a camping spot was Tony and Lee, a couple of my walking buddies that I met and walked with on a irregular basis on the TGO challenge. And it's surprising, Scotland is a massive place, just like Wales is, and you consider that you look on the map, and what does Tony say is it's always sunny when you're looking at the map. And so you see a stream bed and you think, oh, that'll be beautiful, just nice and easy to camp there. And that particular clip was Tony and Lee desperately trying to find a flat pitch on a very, very large area. I managed to get the big area for my shelter, and they struggled to find a narrow pitch for their little notches. But they managed, and again, it was a good night. But things aren't always as easy on the ground as they might appear on the map.
Can I just pick up one thing, Bob? I mean,
yeah.
There's somebody called Normal Bloke here has talked about, there's no need for fires, always use gas. I mean, I've seen people almost burn down half a hillside by knocking over their gas canister. So you just need to be careful. Now, whether you're using gas, whether you're using alcohol stoves, obviously you have to make sure you're not going to knock the damn thing over. And if you're using one of these small backpacking wood burning stoves, and they are tiny, you're going to be using them over some stones or on this shingle of a beach or something like that. So I wouldn't want to go and say this method of cooking is safer or easier than other ones. I mean, like I say, I've seen somebody burn down half a mountain by knocking over a gas stove. But it adds another dimension to it, and not everybody will do it. A lot of people will just want to take out their cartridge stove, and that's fine with them. We're not talking about survival. We're not talking about bushcraft. We are talking about things that can add something to it. And if you're on a longer walk, then yeah, why not? If you've got the leave no trace philosophy, then you're leaving no trace.
It's I'll get the right button in a second. So is there anybody that wants to ask any particular questions on some of the subjects we've talked about already, or would like to know a little bit more information? As I say, I'm going to put all the links to the various websites we've mentioned in the show notes, so they're there for reference. But if there's anybody got any questions at all or anything they'd like to mention at this point, then send us a note on Twitter or type it into the YouTube chat. I'm finally picking up the details now, and I've got the chat next to me here. So we'll do what we can to answer that. But I'm just going to play the cooking slides because I rather like that. But the views. Let's have a look at some of the views, because these are some of your pictures, Andy, that you've taken from the Pyrenees, thinking about it. Oh, that's something worth stopping and looking at for a second. Wild camping and the dangers. These guys are a couple of Americans that were on the TGA Challenge last year, I think, not this year, when it was slightly wetter and boggier. And they were navigating via a GPS and just holding the GPS system in their hands and going in a straight line from A to B without taking into account what a Scottish bog might consist of. They didn't ask, I suppose they weren't aware of it really until they've experienced one. But unfortunately they both marched full tilt straight into this, up to their chests. And I remember a friend of mine, I went wild camping with him to Snowdonia, and exactly the same thing happened to him as well. He was just striding ahead of me and saw a light green patch of grass which looked very nice to go striding across, and he went straight down up to his chest, and it was really thick stuff. And it does concern you.
I've done it.
You think about it afterwards. If you'd been on your own.
I've done it 4 or 5 times with Bob in Scotland. I think that. Sorry, go on.
I was to say, it's the thing that crosses your mind is how you'd actually get out.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I'll say about that is, if you are walking alone, then it's more important than ever not to take risks. And the old adage that the mountain will still be there and you come back next year is fine. So I think that's the first thing. I mean, I've been, on every occasion it's happened to me in a significant way, I've had somebody else with me.
I don't know what's happened there. Andy seems to have gone. I think the signal might have gone, so hopefully I'll come back in a second. What I was going to do was go back to these questions. Let's just have a quick look. First of all, Alan Wilson, he was saying that Skye's become a bit of a tourist hotspot. We went and did the Skye Trail last year, but it was early May, and if you've seen the videos, you've heard the podcast, you'll know it was pretty rough weather, but it was very, very quiet. Having said that, we did see a lot of people that said that as soon as it starts to warm up from sort of Easter onwards, then it does get rather busy and was almost gridlocked a couple of years back. Unfortunately, the negative news that the BBC put out got exaggerated by CBS over in the States and got turned into the fact that Skye was in lockdown and you had to pay to get on, etc., which was a complete lie, obviously. Oscar has shared a similar story about damage that can happen if you accidentally knock over a stove, any type of stove, whether it's alcohol, gas or wood. It'll obviously catch fire, because all the fabrics that tents are made from, your technical clothing, your sleeping bag, etc., etc., are highly flammable. And Jim and Mags Newton, thanks very much. They're asking an interesting question about how would you go about asking permission. That's a really tricky one, and when I did the walked across the 2 moors way there, walked through a lot of agricultural land, and just like the land around us, we're in a fairly rural area, it's very, very hard to know who owns what field, etc., etc. I was speaking to the guys in Ireland, Tough Souls, and they were saying in Ireland it's slightly easier because everybody knows everybody. And you can obviously ask the question, but I really wish somebody would bring in a simple system, actually, of putting some sort of note on a gate and a telephone number as regards who owns that particular land, particularly when there's animals on it, etc., that might have escaped, shall we say. So all I could say is possibly go to the local pub, and if you can, of course, and ask around there, because usually they know everybody and everything that's going on. Right, well, I'm going to try and get Andy back, but while I do, I'm just going to run this little video. And there's another good question here from Andy about how do you manage on a multi-night wild camp when it's wet and you're forced to pack it away and you reuse a wet tent? You first, I'll tell you my story afterwards.
Oh, wet tents. Oh, the joy. I mean, if you're camping in the UK, you're going to get a wet tent. The first thing I would do is to just take the tent and shake it to try and get as much water off it as I could. If I've got a backpacking towel with me, I will rub it down.
I'm listening. We can still hear you, Andy.
So it's okay. I'm just getting a bit of double echo. So I would. That's what I'll be doing. I'll be using a backpacking towel if I've got one, wiping the tent down, and then it's easier to wring the towel out. But another thing that's really useful with certainly lightweight shelters is to attach them to a side pocket that's got a drainage hole in it, or in the mesh pocket at the back or the front. And as you walk, the water will drip away, and you'll actually lose a lot of weight during the day. But I mean, the reality is that if it's very wet, your backpack is going to be a lot heavier. But that's what I would do. I'd try and get as much water off it before I started, and then I would stash it in the side of my pocket. Although if you ever do that, always be very careful. I was walking down a road away from the dam at Loch Mona a few years ago, and passed some guys coming up in a car, and about half an hour later they came back and they said, "Excuse me, is this yours?" And it was my tent, which I'd had in the side of my rucksack, and it had fallen out. So as ever, you need to pack carefully.
Okay, well, unfortunately, it appears like we're having a few technical problems. I've got Andy's audio, but his face is frozen in not the most charming of expressions. But we'll do what we can to to answer. In fact, Andy, if you want to just log out and log back in again, see if it'll come through. I'll keep it going for a second. What was I going to say? The wet tents. That was right. Yeah, Rose and I have done a good 10 days solid of rain, wet day and night, with down sleeping equipment and down insulation, which was a challenge. But it is possible, as Andy describes, really. Basically, the tent is the first thing out of your pack, so don't take anything else out of your pack. So put the tent up while it's wet or while it's raining and get inside, get some shelter. Get out of your wet gear if you can, put that to one side because that's what you'll be wearing possibly the following day. And then obviously do what you have to do and stay warm and dry, keeping everything in waterproof roll top bags, etc., etc. Then in the morning, what we tend to do is pack the bag, rucksack as much as possible beforehand, get everything back into the roll top bags. Everything that needs to be kept waterproof is kept waterproof, put in the bag. The inside of the tent, if possible, is taken down completely. And then we find, don't use a J cloth, but actually a sponge, a domestic sponge, the ones that are sort of like, about that big, to actually wipe the tent down. And you'll see experienced backpackers wiping their tent down on the inside and the outside. Once you've got the inner tent down, as it were, you get to the condensation, wipe it all down. It's surprising how much water comes off from condensation. And of course, if it has been raining outside, suggests that the ground is going to be wet and you're heating the ground up, so you're creating more condensation inside the tent as well. So it's a self-perpetuating problem, really, and it could potentially get worse. But having said that, with a little bit of logic thinking and wiping it down as much as you can, even when it's raining, wiping it down, it can make a massive difference. And as Andy says, put it in the outside of your rucksack, so that when you have the opportunity, should you have the opportunity in the day and the sun comes out or it stops raining, lay it out very quickly, even for 10 minutes. It makes a big difference. And then once again, you pitch the tent and hopefully start the cycle all over again. Are you back, Andy? It looks like you are.
I am, Bob. Yes, if you can hear me.
Indeed, I can.
Sensible advice, that.
Okay, well, I think we're sort of running up to time now. We've been about an hour. There's a few people coming in with a few more questions, so if you'd just like to ad lib for a second, I'll pull these questions up and then we'll answer that and call it a day, I think.
Okay, I can't see the questions at the moment. But
oh no, nothing's come up yet. I'm just give me a second or two. Right, let's have a look. Alan Wilson's got a story. Normal Bloke's got a story. And let's have a look.
Yeah, Norman is making the same point that you were. He takes a Normal Bloke. He takes a large square of absorbent flat sponge, which is quite sensible. They'll soak up a lot of water, and a wet tent doubles its weight almost.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
yeah, definitely it does. Right, well, I think we've sort of come to a bit of an end, really. I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining in. Sorry once again about the technology. It's just completely out of my hands. Keep going back and forward till we got the stream going. But hopefully we'll get that solved. Everything else was all ready to go. It was just the technology that let us down. And of course, feedback's always useful, always helpful. Bearing in mind we are just dipping our toes in the water of this sort of thing. So if you'd like to have a chat or see us chat about any other subjects related to self-powered travel, be it camping, cycling, walking, hiking, navigation, whatever, and is particularly experienced in the Pyrenees, then by all means drop us a line on the email or via any of the social media accounts. But I think on that note, I shall say my farewells. Thanks very much again for joining us. Anything you want to join in with, Andy?
Yeah, just to say, if somebody wants to go out wild camping for the first time and they're looking at trying to find some good camp spots, go onto the Outdoor Station Facebook page or whatever, and say to people you're looking at a spot for here, or if you see my blog, send me an email, and I'll be quite happy to share that information with you, as will other people. I'm a little bit reticent, as I said earlier, about putting wild camp spots on pages for hundreds of people to see. But if you get in touch with most people, they'll share some information and some tips with you. And always in this community, and it is a community, you'll find people more than happy to talk and take a phone call or whatever. So just get in touch.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll put Andy's website details as well in the show notes. So thanks everybody for joining us, and well, safe wild camping out there.